Hey, this is Scott, and I wanted to post a little video about the weekly readings that we've been doing. Since the end of October, the beginning of November, and right around that time when Scorpio and Mercury started their little dance, aka the retrograde, amongst other things. I'm not an astrologer. I am learning and applying those things and seeing how my own wisdom and spirit connection connects to those planetary motions and sky stories. Um, so, the thing that I've noticed is that as we moved into Scorpio, I got super emo. Um, some of the words that I started to apply as we ended October and moved into November um, were sting or stinging, reactive emotionally, shadow dancing. And when we first pulled cards during that time, one of the quotes that I drew from the Dream Dust Tarot was Dancing with Chaos. I believe that was one of the swords cards. I would have to double check on that one. Unimportant at this point, except to say that it was a dance with chaos. And in that reading, we talked about finding our footing and recognizing who we're dancing with, meaning in the interactions that we have during a retrograde cycle, who comes in as a quote-unquote lesson for us, or who do we choose, who do we resonate with at that time and why, and it's to be more conscious about it, right? To be more aware that we've chosen to be wherever we're at, or circumstance, ill luck, or however you want to calibrate your understanding of where you're at. When we land there, we are there by choice or reason or accident, but here we are and we're in that place. And who are we with, right? I liked the words dance with chaos because I could have used who are you stuck in an elevator with, and that would have framed things differently. And I think that framing and the language that we choose shapes the way we interact with the world. Creatures of ideals, right? Um, uh, we draw on our muses, we draw on our thoughts, and the things that stick to us start to color and shape the experiences that we have. Sometimes that perspective and the experience sort of interpenetrate each other, and we have a really good weave. We have a really good in and out understanding about what's happening and where we're at. And sometimes the memes that we choose, I'm a survivor, I'm going to get through this, any of those things are good for a time, and it may be time for you for that. And sometimes those have outlived their purpose and they need to be redressed. Are we looking in a retrograde cycle at how we're repeating the same things that we've repeated for the last 15 years, right? Or 20, or since childhood, or maybe they were our parents. So that was a thing that was there to look critically, and that's not a judgmental criticalness, but that's with like an acuteness in our perception, to look critically at ourselves and why we're choosing the language that we're choosing and how often we have chosen it and where has it gotten us. The dancing with chaos part was part of that, right? Because our framework sets the tone or vibration that we carry, and also in certain circles metaphysically might attract who it is that's come into that dance with us, and to be able to see who is there and rightly see what their motivations are so you can adjust your actions with wisdom, hopefully with love, to create powerful choices for yourself about where you wanted to be and what you were doing. In the second week of our readings, we talked about trusting your heart. And an interesting topic came up in one of the ways that spirit speaks to you. A meme came up from a Twitter quote, and I'm going to pull that up real quick, in which people were talking about trauma and how it creates a state called hypervigilance that can come from abandonment and a phobia of that. And how this is associated, what I'm reading here as I talk to you, it's associated with anxiety, PTSD, OCD, etc., and how we can be really keen to look for those things in our environment. Although this wasn't directly part of the reading, I think it's important, because if we move into the second part of what I was reading in the Scorpio Mercury Retrograde astrological sky story of what was happening here, there was an aspect of trusting your heart. How do you know, right, that your heart is being informed properly by your intuition? That's not a judgment. I think that this is a point of nuance. There was a researcher that I read, and it was through Tammy Simon's Insights at the Edge, and I've looked for this, so if anybody has access to this particular episode, I would love a link for that. But in this, it was a researcher who originally started out looking to interview readers and healers and mystics to learn about their backstories and what brought them to where they were in their lives. And what this researcher found is that, hands down, everyone that he interviewed had some sort of traumatic childhood experience in their lives, and in a few exceptions, either had an NDE or a near-death experience, or they had done an intensive training that caused them to have a reality break in a safe way that opened up their perceptions. In my experience, what I drew from that researcher and from that talk was that the development of hyper-awareness comes from whatever the original traumatic experience, or living in a traumatic place where a child is constantly searching for or seeking danger in their environment. That develops because we're using all our senses to be able to read people, the capacity to have intuition about the motivations of people in our environment, right? So our scanning opens intuition so that we don't get hurt again, that we can read visual or hear auditory cues or understand movements, things that might cue us into how we could be hurt again. This could, it doesn't always, but it could lead to psychism, psychic ability, right? Psychic ability and intuition are related but different, right? Because their function may be the same, our ability to intuit something, but the ability that developed would be psychic ability, right? It doesn't always, it doesn't always. We can have keen intuitions about what's going to harm us, but we might not have been harmed when we were young, and we have developed a keen intuition about numbers, and thus we're a great mathematician or an accountant. Or we could have developed a keen intuition about food, and we become a chef, we become an artist with our food. But it doesn't always mean that the intuition that comes from early childhood trauma or traumatic experiences develops psychic ability, right? We may be great at a certain point at discerning with exacting precision, who is potentially going to be harmful, but that doesn't necessarily spill over into being intuitive about everything else, right? I'm not justifying trauma or any traumatic experience. Obviously, there's something in those people that's probably trauma in their lifetimes, which is probably from someone who had trauma in their lifetimes, and so on and so forth. That is a chain of trauma and abuse that often happens in families or in life with individuals that gets passed on in that sort of way. And this is very much something that I'm still studying. is these motivations. But the point being was that within that, and especially with where we're at in the world right now, we have the opportunity with the language and the people that are filling our media at this point about spirituality and magic and intuition, the capacity to take that hypervigilance or that intuition and develop it into something that could be psychic ability, that could be useful for someone else. So, and usually in my, and I'm just gonna like kind of cut this in here, usually in my training of things, I usually have people work on themselves before they work on other people. Not always, but usually to understand the different voices that are inside our heads. There's a voice that may be, you know, this, I'm definitely speaking from my own story here, who has had trauma in their childhood, that might show up as an intuition about people that may or may not be true. Because just because I read that someone could potentially be harmful doesn't mean they are, right? It just means that my intuition and my hypervigilance has tuned me into that, right? With training, right, with development, that's not just magical development, that's not just going to see someone and becoming an intuitive or becoming a healer. That could be in the arts, that can be through psychotherapy. I know wonderful people in all of those spaces, and others who've developed their intuition and their intuitive capacity beyond their childhood in traumas into other forms of arts, right? But it is to say that there was a note in our reading, because I'm talking about readings, and we're coming back to that even though I'm referencing this thing that I posted to the Scott K. Smith author page, that's me, that there was in the second week of our readings, which is the week that we just left, the note to trust our hearts, and the ask later on, how do we know what's speaking? Yes, it's our intuition. Is our intuition being informed by our fear, aka our trauma, right? Or is it being informed by our higher self? Is it being informed by the aspect of us that's outside the trauma, that's outside the experience, but speaking into it, to our intuition, to inform us how we can heal and grow and transform and evolve into the beings that we most desire to be in our heart of hearts, you know, who we really, I believe, came here to express and to be. So this week, our readings, and this is why I'm here today. What I noticed in the reading this week was the looking at spaces that we're in. Now, within the context of everything that we just talked about, what's informing you in that space? Who are you with in that space, and why are you there, right? The answers that I started to look at were questions about what has guided us there, and do we feel guided in that space, okay? What is guiding us, right? Is it our sky story? Is it a mythos that we have about the dream of our life and the direction and the place that we want to be, right? Or is it the same story over again? I'm surviving, I'm getting out, I'm gonna be in a better place. So that you can be in a better place, so that you can be surviving, so you can get out, so you can be in a better place. So that you can be in a, you know, like what's the story that's really guiding you there? That story usually from the upper realms. It's where you get a lot of the Hopi-feely stuff, and I think that that's great stuff. We need that. We need those star stories, because those star stories provide us with the necessary energy and guidance to lead us to the places where we are healed. If we're not finding that in those spaces, to look that if we need to maybe pause and stop the punchiness of saying like, you know, it's effed up and I need to get out and this is a better place. That may be true. That may be true for some of our experiences. But it could also be that we need to recalibrate ourselves to find the voices that we need to listen to that bring us into the experience of now, so that we understand that there's a part of us that needs to change or heal, right? There might be something that's referential in the spaces that we enter that could be reminding us of actually joyful places, or places where we would escape to when we were young. And those could be indicators all or some, about where we find ourselves in the next couple of weeks. And I want you to just ask yourself, is it informing you about a pleasure and enjoyment of now, and that is good, and you should have those. Don't let someone's spirituality squash your pleasure, so long as your pleasure is not at the expense of other people, right? Is it part of your bigger story? Does it have meta, right? Is it really part about your desire or the place that you want to be in the world? If it doesn't, and if the change is not you, what do you need to move into the next space? What do you need to do to start to create a vision about what that next place is? And what would be the indicators to you in your personal references, or in, like in what you would like to design, or where you would like to see yourself, that you would look for in those spaces? I think spaces is an atmosphere is a big word for this week. So I want you to look at those also, so that when you enter them and you see who's there and you understand how you feel and you ask yourself, does it spark joy? You do a little Marie Kondo thing. Does it? Yeah, I pulled the Sun card, right? So it's like clearly like what brings you joy card there to your deep self, right? Does it fit in with the big story that your higher self is speaking to you? How does that inform your intuition about where you need to be next? There's a full reading of that on the subscriber page, which is through the sacredother.com. Link is in my profile. Or you can use this reading here to help you navigate this week. Any of the references that I mentioned in the video are either on the subscriber page or they're on the Facebook page, which is not my personal page on Facebook. It is an author page on Facebook. I've kind of moved away from posting personal stuff on the personal page. So it is there. That link is also on my profile. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great weekend. And let me know if you have any questions. Bye.